Hi everybody, welcome back to an AU Core Technical Design group. This one is Thursday the 18th of September. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country and that we acknowledge three traditional custodians of the lands in which we all gather today, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and that we extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and we acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators and healers. Today's agenda, we'll start with the usual business, which is what we always do. We'll do a bit of the ballot update, which is our new standing item until we complete the ballot activities. We'll do a testing update. We now have all the reports and the stats in from our last testing event, which was the HL7AU Connectathon in Brisbane. And then we'll go into ballot reconciliation. There was notification that we would be looking at 4 of the items that were voted on in ballot for consideration for change prior to publication of AU Core R2. So we'll have a look at those and make decisions on whether or not we're going to be making any changes, and if so, of what nature. And then we'll finish off with a what's next. So that's the proposed agenda for today. Is there anything else that people want to add on to that agenda? All right, let's get started. So, usual business. First up is approval of minutes. These were sent round for review. Just go to them now, just confirming their state. So these are out. They have the attendees. We've got our recording, our slides. We've got the transcript and chat log attached. We've got the minutes here with a record of decisions made. Not that we really made any particular decisions in our last call. Oh no, this is the wrong one. Oops, that link went to the wrong place. Let's go to this one instead. Sorry about that. Okay, this one I'll run through again. It still has the attendees. It still has the appropriate recording. It has the slide pack. We've got the summary of minutes and any of the decisions made, which I don't know if we made any decisions, but let's do a quick scan. No, this was really a report back from the Connectathon. Yeah, this was really a report back from the Connectathon and some of the implications coming out of that. All right. Does anyone need any more time to review those minutes before we move to approve? Not hearing any. Would anyone like to motion approval of those minutes?
I can motion to approve. Landon.
Thanks, Landon. Would anyone like to second?
David McKillop.
Thanks, David. Any other questions or comments while I find the electronic poll? Buttons, where are you? And all sorts of stuff. There we go. Okay. What should have popped up in front of you is an electronic poll for approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you don't have access to that, like I think maybe Landon, you don't, you can pop in the chat a +1 for affirmative, negative, or abstain. And if you've dialed in, you can just say your name and whether you are affirmative, negative, or abstain. Just going to give another second because we need a couple more participants to vote. All right, I'll count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end the poll and share the results. With the vote in the chat, that is 8 affirmative, 0 negative, 17 abstain. The motion carries, the minutes pass. Back back to the rest of our usual business on updates and news. So for those of you who didn't join us in the last meeting, we do know that the next connectathon, the HL7AU one, will be in Melbourne. It'll be on the 9th and 10th of December. The Eventbrite isn't available yet, but it should be soon. Do we have Brett or someone from HL7AU on the line who could provide any update on that?
I'm not sure when the information is coming out at all. But yeah, keep an eye out for it. I will try and let work groups know before others. Anyway, yep.
All right, thanks, Brett. The ballot voting period has closed, so we're now in ballot reconciliation. So we'll get now our final stats that I'll show around where that's at. The other thing I wanted to advertise for everybody is some time ago, there was a call put out on Zulip around fire validation, and we're looking for inputs from all across the world. And that was an anonymous survey. I know a number of pieces of feedback were provided from Australia, but also from a whole bunch of different nations. And that's all been consolidated and now being published and publicly available for download in that Zulip link. I don't know if maybe Jushi, you could pop that link in the chat for people.
Okay, I'll do it now.
Awesome. So yeah, for anyone who's interested, you can go see and get the results of that. It's quite a good read, actually. Next bit, like I said, the International Connectathon Work Group meeting is happening now. And I've asked for one of the Australian participants to give us a little bit of a summary of some of the outcomes and if anything about that actually affects us at our next meeting. Last bit, AU Base, of course, has started their reconciliation. They started last week. And that will be continuing both out of last week's meeting and the one that's just coming up. None of the items are of particular relevance. If any of the items are particularly relevant, and by particularly relevant, I mean would materially change the content in AU Base, like maybe it changed the terminology we inherit, or maybe it adds an invariant or something that we would pick up, then we would, I guess, advertise that in this call so that if people are interested, they could provide comment on any of those tickets or join the meeting anyway, because the calls for AU Base are also open. So anyone can go to those and vote. But at the moment, the immediate agenda is around e-requesting relevance rather than core. Okay, next, face-to-face. I did briefly talk about this last week, but the tickets and everything are out now. So there's a CDG, TDG day coming up in November in Canberra. So that's the 12th and 13th of November. There's a QR code there for the Eventbrite tickets. These have been out for, I think they came out Monday this week. There's 120 places for the TDG day. 68 of those tickets are taken up, so roughly 50% has kind of sold through already. So if you're interested, I would advise getting into that. All these slides, by the way, are on today's minutes already. And Dushi, if you could pop a link to today's minutes, that would be great.
No
So
worries.
here's great, thanks, Dushi. Here's the agenda for CDG TDG. So CDG is going to talk about encounter record. That's an evolution, I think, of the reason for encounter piece. That will come through into the fire space where there will be a project run on encounter records. And what does it mean, and how do we exchange that within fire eventually? So this is continuing that conversation that started with the early reason for encounter and into more of a, from a clinical perspective, what are the MVP kind of data requirements around Encounter. There's an ask from the CDG side to have technical participants in that meeting as well. And I understand that about 50% of the tickets for the CDG day are sold as well. They'll also be talking through GP chronic condition management plan and looking at confirming the requirements of the MVP. That is also expected to have some FHIR component. I understand there's thoughts around some kind of like questionnaire or smart form kind of project coming up. So both of these will be the precursor kind of clinical requirements coming into some FHIR projects. On the TDG side, we're continuing the patient summary work. It's primarily patient summary. Starting to have, or at least I guess maybe finishing part of the initial conversation with the community on functional limitations of receiving an IPS that doesn't conform to an AU patient summary. I won't go into that further because this isn't the patient summary call unless anyone wants me to talk about it here. There's also going to be an AU patient summary hot topics, which continues to do like a roadshow around the country where we talk about hot topics and get an evolution of where the community is at and further progress that. That's usually around things like exchange, and sometimes it's also around things like encryption or consent and access. What is also on the table is the AU Core R3 prioritization of the backlog. Now, that was brought up in the last call as a possibility. There were a number of people who were interested, but it really wasn't the majority of the people on the call. Subsequent to that call, a number of people emailed me and spoke to me and said that they wanted to pitch. Basically, they actually really wanted to go ahead and do that. We got quite a significant response. So based on that, there's going to be a session for the AU Core R3 pitches at that November day. And here is the pretty slide for it. So the idea here is to basically offer a session at that community event to allow community to essentially pitch what is the priority for them in AU Core R3, be that a profile, be that a new actor and or capability statement, be that some other kind of thing, and put that forwards for inclusion in the next release of AU Core R3. There's a template that people can use for an initial EOI so that we can select amongst them. The idea is that we can have about 8, I think, in the session to allow for, pitches, but let's have them short, maybe 4 minutes, real quick, and then also allow for questions so that that can then feed into a set of community prioritization activities. So that's out now and available until, I think that closes in a month. It's about 4 weeks from now that is open. So please consider if there is a enhancement into AU Core that is a priority for you over the next 10 to 11 months, putting in a pitch. That can also be something that is formed through, I guess, a group of people. Some of the people I've spoken to say that, look, they're actually thinking of putting this forward, but it's actually really relevant to an entire market sector, and there's 5 or 6 different organizations interested. So one of them would be there to do the pitch, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all of them would be. So that's the intention behind that. Are there any questions around this one?
A question. Okay, so people come and make the pitch. I presume the session will be videoed so people out there can also see the pitch. How do we then respond to those pitches to decide what's going to go into version 3? Is this just another source of information for the process that we'll later have to choose what's in V3?
It is to a degree. Part of that, it is an input into it. So whatever comes into a particular release is always a balance of how, and we have criteria in AU Core, and we have to assess it against the criteria, and we will have to make some decisions on it, which would be in a later call on that. I don't really see us turning anything down unless it falls out of our timelines. We really do have restrictions, obviously, every year on how much can we actually put through a development, a testing, and a ballot process. But if there's community work and someone wants to actually say, I have a design, I have this great idea, I'm going to actually put that forward to the community for a new proposal, that's always in scope of releases. It doesn't even require this community pitch, though I think that's actually a really fantastic idea to do it there. Someone can just raise a JIRA, and during the open development period we have for every release, which runs for about 6 months, they can ask to have this item put on the agenda, and it just gets brought forwards, which is how it's how I think the agency introduced AU Core Healthcare Service in AU Core R2, is through that process of it just being open for inclusion from the community of a design to progress through to standardization. So I don't have a black and white answer for you, except to say that I think this is the things that people would put forward, if they're feasible, are based on our principles for inclusion in a release. I would say it goes in, and it's really around feasibility and is it appropriate for AU Core.
Thank you. I think that made things clearer.
Okay. Sanjeev?
Daniel, just a question, and with regards to profile, whether it is a profile, right? And this is, are we deviating from what we had done for R2, and shouldn't this be originating at the CDG and then coming to TDG, or TDG is free to decide on which profiles will pick for R3?
We've always been free to decide. There are things. So in terms of the relationship between AU Core and AU CDI, AU CDI covers not just core but other use cases. One could make a meaningful argument that one of the designs, the data groups that already is published in AU CDI but for chronic condition management is actually relevant to AU Core. So the modeling's already there. It's just not, there's no profile in AU Core. So that's one way in which we don't yet that might address that relationship. The other is that where depending on the nature of the profile, like provenance, for example, there's a number of like security, consent, access, authorization, audit trail things that are necessary for a technical implementation to support interoperability that do fall outside of the AU CDI scope. They're very clear that they don't do administrative or billing or security or any of those kinds of things. So any profiles like that are completely up to the technical group to even identify in the first place as relevant and progress through. And then we have that other ground, which is I think what you're hinting at, of let's say someone puts up, what don't we have yet? Care plan, or something else that is clearly a clinical concept that has no publication.
What about
in
consent?
AUCDI.
What about consent? Does it sit with TDG or CDG? Sorry.
It depends on whether or not consent is about clinical consent to a procedure or consent to share, which is about authorization and access. Authorization and access, that sits totally with the TDG. Expressing clinical concepts, we would need to flag it with the CDG to check and see, do they think this falls within their remit or not? And if it does, how we could proceed. And we may get the advice from the CDG that they are uncomfortable with us and would say that no, our advice is to not proceed until there's a model. Or they might say that we're comfortable as long as you have reps in the meetings for you to proceed. So we kind of have to go through that process if it falls into that category. So by all means raise it, but some things might be easier to do than others.
Okay. I mean, my point being, I mean, CDG might also add to our backlog, R3 backlog, right? Then is it a choice? Then do we decide between the EOI candidates and CTG items for R3?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. We have a principles. Hang on, let me go to it. There's actually a nice page. Oops, hands are wet, so that's not working very well. If I go to the LinkedIn post, because it has a link.
Capacity to do the work is always a real filter on what gets done.
It is. Oops, that's fine. Go here. So because what you're talking about, Sanjeet, is this. Does it get into a release?
Yeah.
And things that are guaranteed is that it's both in AUCDI and high community interest. And by that, that's this group. The TDG both want it. Maybe is where it's one or the other. So if we want it, but it's not in AUCDI and it's a clinical concept, we do have to go back and have a conversation with the clinical design group. And if we get advice that it's clinically unsafe to proceed, I think we have to take that very seriously. And so I feel like if we use these principles, which I think so far are working for us to help decide whether or not things that are put forwards can actually fit into a release, then I think it's going to be a good guide. And if we find any further clarifications, we can update our principles if we find, we need to consider another point that we don't yet have as a criteria. Does that address what you're asking for, Sanjeet?
Yeah, I think sort of answers, but just more like, have we changed the process for R3 or because R2 probably?
No, we have. The overall process, no. The fact that so the last time we had a big face-to-face workshop, we got people to do worksheets at tables, and then we asked people to comment on them via microphone. So for me, this is just another similar activity to that, where people could, in the last scoping workshop for AU Core, put forward an idea that wasn't already identified. And in fact, of the ideas that were identified, many of them aren't yet in AUCDI because, AUCDI hasn't got there. So I do think it's still the same considerations.
Got it.
But it was more like we were bringing, like Sparked was bringing those as candidates. But this time it's really the community that's bringing these candidates.
So basically, last time candidates were coming and picking and voting on the ideas, but now candidates are proposing the ideas. So, and then we'll vote on them.
And this isn't the only activity. This is just one of them. I think this is introducing, and we'll trial it. If this doesn't work for us, then we won't continue it. But this is a trial, and there's going to be another couple of meetings where we talk through scoping and do like a fortnightly call and call out for like, what does anyone want? What kind of JIRA is in the backlog? Is there anything else? And do some of those sessions like we did in AU Core R2. But I think you're right that this is the first time we've tried the open community, what would you like, in such a really obvious way. And we'll need to, I guess, part of the report back in consideration will have to be, did this work? Or is it not appropriate for us going forwards? Oops. All right. Any other questions or anything that people want to go into on the AU Core R3 backlog community pitch? Okay. So let us go on then into a bit of a testing update. I showed you an earlier slide, last reporting period, last call. This is now the final slide. For those of you who want to use this, you can use any slide in our slide pack, and that includes this one. This is now updated and confirmed against the testing records that we actually have. which shows some of the connections and the testing out of the last connectathon. I don't think we've managed to capture everything, so we might try a bit more in the December connectathon to try to get even more information on that. But it still was a pretty amazing record of the different connections on the day from the different use cases. Notable also as well, the some systems doing multiple use cases. Now, if you represent one of these organizations and you look at this slide and you're like, I did more than this, or that's not right, please let me know so that I can update the slides. All right. So we've now got 30 different products. The addition that we have test results for, which isn't everybody here, we now have test results captured for Epic, who's been at a few of the connectathons, but we didn't actually get any of the official results to record against coverage of AU Core. We've got that now, so that's nice. So that bumps us from 29 to 30. We have significantly increased numbers. So that was one of the things I was saying at the last call, that although there was only a couple of new players in the room, what we saw was much greater spread of implementation. So implementations and conditions have jumped from 19 up to 23. Encounters has jumped out a couple. Immunizations jumped up to 19. So we saw increases across the board, except in really two areas. Healthcare service, still, we're going to need to put a call out for that. And some of the vitals we didn't get increased numbers on. And also diagnostic result, which is a non-pathology, non-imaging, didn't get an increased testing coverage out of the last event. I don't know why body temperature out of all of these did, but nonetheless, body temperature had increased testing results out of the last connectathon. So those are our numbers on what we're sitting at the moment, which I think is looking really good for assessing some of the interoperability outcomes and feasibility from AU Core. We haven't actually seen any changes in our coverage of AU Core requirements. So we actually have coverage of our requirements for everything really but healthcare service. And of course, still on the consumer side, we've still got the consumer capability statement for requesters that doesn't have significant coverage over all aspects. All these results are on the testing page. We've got the detailed, which systems done what when. I will, I guess, reiterate, there's no change to the AFMM at the moment. So we don't need to undertake any decision making around moving anything to AFMM 2 unless something changes out of maybe the December connectathon or testing in between. People don't have to wait for the events to test and supply results back to Sparked. You can do that and just email sparked@cyro.au if you want to provide some test results against AU Core. I'm not going to go into any further detail about all the really specific details on it. The links are all there. It's all publicly available and kept up to date. But are there any questions, or did anyone want me to go into any more detail on one of those aspects? All right, let's move to ballot. So final ballot stats here. On our final ballot stats, what we have are out of 60 voters, 38 voted affirmative, 12 voted negative, only 1 abstained this year, 9 didn't vote. So we actually had 86% vote. That's actually really quite high, much higher than the last couple. So I'm really happy about that. I think some of the HL7AU processes have ironed out a little. And so we've just seen a lot more completion from people who signed up to vote, actually going through and voting. We have passed. Throw confetti. Yay. We have the remit to publish AU Core. We will, of course, go through and look at all the ballot items for consideration on any changes we want to make prior to publication, but we have approval from the consensus body to publish. We've met that. Well done, team. Okay. So here's our numbers now. We've got 18 JIRA issues. I just want to call out, lots more were raised. I was really impressed with what I saw from the community on undertaking kind of like an increased sort of understanding of how do I like raise my issues and how do I vote in ballot. So quite a few of the things that got raised by people were, as they've read through, they've identified some new thing they want. New things are next release because we're now in the approval publication part of AU Core R2. We're not in the development stage. So what kind of happened in AU Core R1 was this kind of confusion that people had to just vote on everything for it to even be considered or matter. So we saw a real mix of people just voting on things that they didn't even expect to be fixed now and would be some future release years down the track. That's kind of been fixed, I think. So what we've got now is there's a backlog, which we might see in the community pictures, of people who've reviewed this and raised issues, and they've only voted on some of them. And from my review, it's quite clear to me the ones they didn't vote on are new things, new profiles, like new development work, even related to existing profiles. So I thought that was really good. That's left us with 18 issues relevant to AU Core. For those of you who've been through us with the last two ballots, I think our last ballot was like 170, and the one before that was like 199. It's not really a surprise given the scope of R2, but it's still, I think, maybe welcome that we've seen the numbers drop to this amount, which I think also shows really the good testing numbers we've got and the quite clear feedback throughout it that all the changes introduced in AU Core 2 R2 have been, I guess, non-controversial. They've been things that seem well backed by systems implementing them. So we need to work through those. One of these was a technical correction. Triage is ongoing from the co-chairs, and we're going to vote on some today. We haven't voted on anything yet, but we're going to. Quick reminder of responsibilities. Ballotters have already voted. The co-chairs are mid doing the admin aspects of trying to like triage and check that these things are really core and not base issues, and that we've got, you know, enough information for the TDG members to work with. We're now going through the resolutions and reconciliation, where 4 of those have been advertised prior to this call to say these things will be voted on. Hopefully you've looked at them coming into this meeting and you've got a position on them or questions. And we're going to try to work through them today. And so that's where we're at. We're basically in progress now, working through reconciliation. Here's our schedule. So first meeting is today, 18th of September. Overall, 17 issues are going to come through this call. I think it's 17. That number might be in flux a little because e-requesting and patient summary need to complete their triage and just confirm that they don't need to move any issues to us, to core. So far, neither patient summary nor e-rec think that there's anything that is actually a change that needs to happen in core. So at the moment, that's 17. We'll find out. We should get more stable numbers within a week or two. So we're going to do with 4 today. The rough idea is that we're probably just going to split these up across the next few meetings. The goal is to complete reconciliation at the end of October. So we have 4 ballot reconciliation meetings. That would let us finish R2 and start R3. Basically, in the November, we do the community pitches and we can start working through R3 content. Quick reminder before we go into reconciliation, because this is quite relevant. What's in R2? R2 is on the left. We did 3 new profiles: med statement, healthcare service related person. We added in the AU-CDI mapping on medication use summary, because we added in the actual profile that maps to that, which is AU Core med statement. And we've done some enhancements. In particular, we did some work on the data type clarification for telecom. We also did must support on should populate for some of the date time element choices. And we've inherited the AU-based changes. There's a couple of other things that happened, but they're quite minor. What's in scope of this ballot, as in this is the point of AU Core R2, this is what the ballot was about. The content on the ballot is AU Core R2. That's what's gone out for review. I will advise people as we go through this that requests for new work items. So if we get a ballot voted issue that says, let's have a new profile, that is something that we're going to be deferring really to R3, because all the development and testing work of a release is done now. This is the what do we need to do before we publish the work that we've just done over the last 11 months. Okay, we're going to be going through change requests. Those are the things that come through this call. And here are what we can decide. I'm just going to run through this a bit quickly here, but these are decisions we need to make today for every single one of those 4 issues. We can look at an issue and decide that it's considered for future use. So let's say, for example, someone suggests, I don't know, an entirely new profile and voted on it. And then we would likely vote that should be considered for a future release rather than R2. We can, depending on the nature of the issue, vote persuasive or persuasive with modification if we both agree with the argument and want to make a change. If we both agree with the argument and want to make the change they suggested, it's persuasive. If we agree with the argument but actually want to do something different, maybe want to do some extra things. Maybe someone said, make this one change here. And we went, ooh, that's a problem. And it's in 4 other profiles. And so the resolution was to change it there, but also change 3 other profiles or 4 other profiles. That would be persuasive with modification, because we agree and we're going to make a change, but the change is different, noticeably different than what was suggested. We may say not persuasive, as in we do not agree with the reason or the change suggested. And there's lots of reasons why that might happen. And we might say not persuasive with modification. That is typically where it is where we're going to make a change. So someone may have suggested something and that might be an incorrect thing to do, but based on reading that section of the document, it might be that we need to clarify a bit more clearly what the rules actually are. So that would be not persuasive. We're not actually going to change it because or the way they suggested, but we will make a change to clarify the language that further describes, what the rules actually are. So that's more not persuasive with modification. So they're the things we have to go through today. I'll come back to that table as we go through and make decisions if we need to just reference back to it. With all of that said and done, let's move on to our change requests. We've got 4. So let's just leap into the first one, noting all of these are editorial at the moment. There are very few normative issues raised on AU Core, but these ones that are brought to this meeting are editorial. I think, Brett, is it you that's going to talk to this first one?
Yep, I am.
Do you want to share your screen, or do you want to direct me on where to click?
Would you maybe just look at the ticket, because I think it should be pretty self-evident. All right. So I'll just run through it. The we in AU Core, we do have a general guidance section, which is that link there, which is giving advice on how to represent, how to use BodySite elements in various places in AU Core, especially to include ideas about granularity of the codes and how to represent laterality and things like that related to BodySite. And there's some options offered, and yeah, we went through that as part of R1, and yeah, and that's a nice piece of work. It has come up, and this is through some of the other groups. eRequesting has some interest in this concept as well, that I think it's a better idea to move this guidance into AU Base, where it's kind of in the shared space. That would also allow us to expand it to other uses, particularly in service request and other things which are not service request, no, other things that e-requesting needs as well. And yeah, and the content there is actually very general in nature, and doesn't actually, I think, address any must support or AU Core specific kind of requirements in there. So yeah, it's really just a request to say, can we move that guidance material into AU Base and effectively clean up and relink everything in AU Core that refers to it, to point at the AU Base version. And that is it. It is more general than AU Core. I see Michael.
Brett, yes, thanks. I think this does help peer requesting because we want that guidance as well. I'm just noting on the resolution there, that link says dependent on approved AU base change request, but that's actually an e-requesting change request, that one.
Oops.
Oh yeah.
Which is the
Do you
one
have
that we want the guidance to. So that's the one we
You
want
want the
to
guidance as well?
refer
Yeah.
to AU base as well, which is related. So this is definitely a related one. It's just not the approved AU base one that you might have.
Yeah. So I think
But is there an AU-based ticket raised for this?
no, there's not. But I think I want us to approve that we want this to happen here. And then effectively it's a referral at that point, and we
Yeah.
probably it turns it into almost like a common issue at that point.
So is that
Yeah.
or more, because this is actually a Jira will be.
Will be, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, if
I've
you're
got to
happy
get the tenses right.
yeah, yeah. So if you're happy for
Okay.
this to happen, it can happen. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just update that disposition then. Just for the people, the proposal is that
Yep.
the section, let's go to it now.
Yeah, you can have a look. Yeah. Thanks.
So there's this section that came out of the work in AU Core R1 to describe how to represent BodySite, which might include laterality. In particular, this work was done around procedure and condition resources because they're the two resources that this is relevant to in AU Core, that went through and provided some guidance on how to do that.
Yeah. The only thing is there are like two sentences that mention AU Core specifically, and I don't know. That's probably a question for the group. Do you want to retain anything?
No, we wouldn't. Okay.
Yeah,
Your
because
proposal actually suggests adjust it.
Oh, that was more. I wouldn't specifically mention AU Core, probably in AU Base. I'd more keep it even more general. But I think there's a sentence about talking about AU Core must supports in there, which is just context really. And I don't know whether you want to keep it. So, yeah.
Yes.
So yeah.
My understanding is that what you've suggested is that, I mean, I agree it's not, although from our discussions, And so let's confirm. My understanding is that the meat of this, which is about like this point
all
down,
of that.
moves to AU base. A heading for this section, and in fact, the bits that are AU core relevant will stay with a reference off to AU base for the rest of the content. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very happy. Yeah, that's good. I'm happy with that, and I think it's more everyone else is happy that that's good. In fact, then your internal references will be fine because you'll be referring to this section anyway.
So what you're proposing, just to reiterate, from the AU core provides the following guidance will be moved to base. Is that? But the first paragraph and 2 dot points will be retained.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it won't say AU core provides. It'll just say the following guidance. Yep.
And we'll have a link to the AU
to that
to the AU base guidance.
Yep, and that then opens it up for you requesting to close. Yeah, refer to that too, and work on their tickets. Yeah, so that's the proposal. Yeah, so this is all informative kind of material and advice. So I don't think there's anything substantive there that's going to change any profiles.
Oh, thanks, Brett.
What was the resolution? Was it persuasive or persuasive with mod?
It was persuasive.
Yeah, I'll move that we accept.
Okay, we have a mover. Is anyone happy to second?
I'll second it. It's my ticket.
Okay, thank you, Brett. Would anyone like to ask any questions or go through any more detail before we go to the vote? Hearing none, I'm about to find the electronic poll. If I can. Buttons.
Sorry to steal your thunder, Brett.
As long as it gets done, I'm happy.
Okay. I'm launching the vote now. That's for the current motion on moving this advice to AU base with retaining a portion of that and having a link then off to AU base. I see that 62% have voted, so please vote affirmative, negative, abstain. Put your vote in the chat if you can see the chat. And if you can't see the chat or the poll, please say your name and whether your vote is affirmative, negative, or abstain. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll and share the results. With the vote in the chat, that brings us to 21 affirmative, 0 negative, 6 abstain. The motion carries. We will make that change. Righto, that was quick. Great.
If only they were all like that.
I know. Okay, so that's that one. Next one is on healthcare service identifier to table of must support choice of identifiers. I think this is you, Heath. Is that right?
Yeah, I just sent you a request to share.
Okay, I'm going to just allow.
I'll just replace and show it.
Yep, sounds good.
Is that the right one?
Yes, I can now see your screen.
Which screen?
Your mouse is hovering over BodySite, Laterality, guidance, etc. slide. Now I can see the 52525.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So this is a ticket that I raised. So just to quickly have a look at the actual ticket. It was around the new healthcare service profile and the related guidance associated with the choice of identifiers in the general guidance page. So basically we're talking about this identifier here, which has must support with obligations of shall populate if known and no error. It has a choice of profiles, so any identifier type, HPIO or the residential aged care. And in the general guidance section, we have a area on the choice of identifiers that describes how to interpret the must support on identifiers that have a choice of profile. And currently it states that a profile may support one or more of the identifier types and includes the supported identifiers in a profile by slicing the element and placing must support on each identifier slice. In these cases, the responder shall correctly populate the element with identifiers from at least one supported identifier type where the identifier is known. I paused on supported because that refers, in my interpretation, back to this idea of supported identifiers being sliced. So, as I alluded to, it's a choice, but there is no slicing. So, being a new profile, we probably have a new scenario here where we don't have an identifier. And what I might just to give you a context of another profile that does do this is your patient resource, where we have IHIs, etc. So this is what that guidance was referring to, was that we've got a must support element identifier with lots of choices, but then we've got what we're calling supported identifiers, IHI, Medicare, and DVA, each with must support on those with their own obligations. And the guidance that I referred to was, there was an example of using that patient in that context. So what I was concerned about in this was the issue around, I guess it was a misunderstanding of what was required. So what I recommended was to move the healthcare service profile into the table. And I'm talking about this table that's in that guidance, because it was another scenario of choice of multiple identifiers. I also posed a question around the idea of, was it really intended that none of these identifiers shall be populated? And so I guess that was probably an awkward way of saying, is it okay to not have a HPIO even if I've got one? So if I do have a HPIO, what is my obligation around providing it in that circumstance for that particular healthcare service? So there was really just some ambiguity around that. Now this may seem strange that I'm presenting this, but as my role as a facilitator for Sparked, I'm helping Danielle with this. So basically through the co-chair
Hang on,
process.
we'll just say none of the issues you raised there are on, like, you're a consult. Hang on. So
Exactly.
let's just check the hats here.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you help us out as a facilitator, and I suppose that's probably actually a really good call out to say that when you ballot specifications and raise issues, you aren't doing those on behalf of Sparked for the Sparked specifications. I think you're doing those with the independent consultant hat on, and that's where that's coming from. Yeah.
Correct. So as an individual member of HL7, I am voting on the ballot as an individual, not with my Sparked facilitator hat. Correct. Today I'm talking with my Sparked facilitator hat on. So through the co-chair process of triaging these calls, we've come up with this proposed resolution. And Brett, you've got your hand up. Do I need to go back a step?
Yeah, I think I agree with the the resolution. The yeah, because I don't think because it was discussed about slicing and adding particular obligations on identifiers, and decision was no at this point. And I think if people think otherwise, they should raise tickets. And if and I think there is a point, of clarity in terms of how to interpret must support on elements like this. And I think that's a valid point. But I'm not sure that's what the ticket says. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess there is two parts of this particular one which is basically saying I would like it to be added into this table, but that's the first part, which is that's not persuasive. And then there's the two part, which is my question: is it really intended that we're not going to be populating a HPIO? And that's the second part of the resolution, which is at this point in time, we've decided that it is not necessary to provide that.
Yeah.
It is not a must support obligation for someone to provide their HPIO.
Correct.
At the moment.
Yeah, correct. Because basically the elements unconstrained, because it's just listing data types that are suitable to use in there, including the identifier itself, which means any identifier. So basically, the only actual constraint on that element is there's in fact no content constraint there, right? Because you can basically put any element,
provide any element.
Provide any identifier.
So there is an obligation to provide a identifier, but no particular identifier.
Yeah, correct. So if we want to kind of make that more explicit on any particular type, yes, we need to slice and put obligations on it. And I think that's so the constraints are always true, right? So it's unconstrained here. There's no particular requirement there. And I think that I kind of think yes, maybe some more language would be helpful, but I think that needs a whole discussion. Which I don't. I think
so there is a scenario now because of this healthcare service that doesn't have slices on identifier, where it's perhaps unclear exactly what it means to have must support at the identifier level without slices. Dushi.
Yeah, thanks, Heath. I was just going to propose something similar. I'm proposing amendment to that resolution. I guess that would make it non-persuasive in mod. And that's to update the sentence above the table that says what's included in the table to be explicit about this is only the supported identifier types. So these are the identifiers that are supported by slicing, which I think it's the current wording is a bit confusing and it's not really explicit about that. So I think if it said something like the table below provides a list of AUCOI profile elements with one or more supported identifier types or something similar, it might be a bit clearer.
Richard?
I'm not sure supported is the right word because slicing doesn't support the identifiers. It describes the identifiers or it identifies the identifiers because in a sense, the identifiers can be used without the slicing. So I'm not sure that supported is quite the right word there. The other thing that I had, which was earlier on, was that in fact, I can create a completely useless identifier and meet the obligations here because we, on just the identifier profile, we say you can do anything. You don't actually have to have any useful information as long as you've got some technically adequate information.
So when you're saying that, are you talking in the context of the healthcare service profile where there is no slicing, or are you talking even in the context of the patient where there is slicing with must supports on the individual slices?
In general, what we've got with identifiers is if we don't have any slicing, then there's the obligation on this one says you will supply one of these if you've got one. And you could just supply a raw identifier, and it's a valid raw identifier if you've just got one of its data elements included, and that is not enough to actually be a useful identifier. It's a general feature of many profiles that you can send basically uselessly empty elements and meet the obligation requirements.
So I think in the context of patient and what this section is trying to articulate generally here and then specifically here is that if you've got an IHI, you shall provide it. So if you know an IHI for a particular patient, you shall provide an IHI. You shall provide
I'm just going
and the
to, to a
DVA.
degree, step in
I think I
around,
might
we have some
yep.
time-based limits, and this is going well outside of the proposed ballot ticket.
Yes.
To a degree. We're stepping into some other areas that I think, yeah, there could be some improved clarification on that. In terms of the specific ballot issue, and I think if there's additional wording and noting that there is often an open question on, doesn't matter whether it's identifier or not, something that is an element that is a multiplicity with a must support on it. Does that mean all, one, none? How does that work out? I don't think healthcare service identifier is special. There's nothing about it that is special, which is perhaps the trigger for the issue, is that there was nothing special about it. Can I just check though, are there any disagreements with the fact that, as agreed through our meetings, there are no particular supported identifier types for healthcare service? And we aren't, like, the table shouldn't be updated, given that the table indicates which identifier types are supported in which profiles. Are there any disagreements around that? Then can we go on the proposal, the amendment from Dushi, which was, if you go back, Heath, to the, just one more slide, just one slide, I think, back, or there. So above the table where I know the introduction says this is about support identifiers, of which there are none in healthcare service, no particular identifier whether slicing or any other technical aspect has a must support on it. And I know the table heading says supported identifiers, but the proposal from Dushi is that we also add the word supported and change the introductory sentence to just keep reinforcing that this section is about supported identifiers. So could you put in, did you put in the chat, Dushi, what your proposal was?
Sure, I'll do it now.
Okay, great. If you can copy paste that so that the rest of the group can see it, and then we can open that up to, is this a, are there any suggested changes to what Dushi is putting forwards?
Okay, I'll put it in the chat now.
Okay, so that is yep, minor change to the wording, but it introduces the word supported, and it says one or more supported identifier types, which does two clarifications. It, at the moment, and Heath's highlighted the word multiple, because not everything is a multiple at the moment. Some of the profiles only have one. And the other key part is that it has to be considered supported. So it has a must support flag against it. Are there, I'll open that up for comment on the suggestion from Dushi that's in the well, in the comments. We got 2 thumbs up. Heath, would you find that sentence to?
I think it will help if that's what you're asking. If that. I also think that it is this last sentence that probably covers the other case that was my concern about what is the meaning of when there is no slicing.
I think part of my
mhm.
concern is, but when there is no slicing, and like let's say most elements don't have slicing, I don't think identifiers are special.
No,
They're special when there's specialness, but otherwise they get treated like all other elements.
and I
Like
noted in
patient.address is 0 ... many, and it has more than one type, neither of which are must support. So I don't think this is unique to healthcare service identifier.
I noticed in the US Core, they don't have a section on must support choice of identifiers. They've got a must support section around slicing, where they effectively talk about this, as you say, more generally across any element that has multiple occurrences, such as address and identifiers and telecom.
I think that sounds good, and I would echo what I heard earlier, that I think that's a separate ticket.
Yep.
And I suggest that's actually probably an R3 piece of work, because I think if we sit down and actually take the time to go through it for what does it mean for identifiers versus addresses versus telecoms, are there any differences and how should we approach it? I think we're actually starting to turn that into potentially some normative level of clarifications.
So I think for now, to resolve this particular issue, it's non-persuasive with mod as a motion with a change in line with Dushi's proposal to change these 3 words into with one or more supported identifier types.
Can we just also double check against, oh, hang on, Richard, did you delete your comment? Oh, you did. Okay.
I deleted it. I don't think it's helpful at the moment.
Okay. So that's the proposal. The adjusted proposal is it doesn't go on the table because the table is about particular identifier types that are flagged as must support. That the intro sentence into the table adds those words, or is changed to the words in the chat to clarify that. Are there any other suggested amendments or any questions that we want to go through in order to address this particular ballot comment? Hearing none, who would like to make a motion?
I did before. I might not have been
Okay,
explicit,
sorry.
but yeah.
If Heath has made that motion, who would like to second?
I'll second it, Dusha.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions while we move to the vote? Okay, I'm going to relaunch that poll. You should see that in front of you. So affirmative to not add in healthcare service into the table, but to improve the wording of the sentence above the table. Okay, still need a few more people to vote. Affirmative, negative, or abstain. Okay, I'll count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll. I will share the results. So with the vote in the chat, we have 16 affirmative, 0 negative, and 7 abstain. The motion carries. So we will make that change. I will update the resolution in the JIRA to reflect the not persuasive with modification with that text. The other point, I think, point of order from this is it does sound like, based on what was being discussed from a number of people, that there is value in the introduction of a piece of work around further clarifying what does must support and obligation mean for an element, for a multiplicity, a repeating element. Can I ask if someone would be happy to raise that JIRA, and then we can consider that work in AU Core R3? Heath, would you be interested in raising that? Or potentially Brett?
I'm happy to do that.
Okay. So we'll have the action to do that so that then we can go through and consider those items. For my money, it's not just identifiers, it is across, address, telecom. There's codable concepts that are zero to many. What does it mean across all of them? If we're going to go forwards and clarify, we may as well really pick this up and have a considered conversation on what does all of that mean.
Okay. So the next issue, if you're happy for me to move on.
Go for it.
Okay, so this is 552.526, which is to clarify guidance related to must support choice of data type with should populate. So there's some new guidance in this page.
I'm still seeing 52525.
Sorry, I'm looking at a different screen.
That's correct now.
So there's some new guidance that added to the description for the use of should populate. And I'm basically suggesting it's a little bit ambiguous at the moment. And also that the notes associated with it was referring to obligation notes from able to populate and not from should populate. So I'll just transfer to, so we're talking about this section in general requirements. So must support choice of data types, which is standard content that's been there for a while. This is the new section that I've highlighted over here. Some of the data types choices are labeled as must support and apply an additional obligation of should populate. And I'll give you an example of where this is done. Where is this done? Allergy intolerance. So we've got our normal must support on the onset, which is populate if known, but we have then got, change that to differential. With that, why is that not populating correctly? Is that, oh, that's the bug, isn't it? So there is no obligation appearing here, but I'll show you to that note. But basically there is a must support on the onset date time. And what we would expect over here is an additional obligation of should populate. And there, this is the STU note up the top here that refers to this. That's basically saying that the onset date time has a should populate obligation on it. And if we actually went to the JSON for this profile, you would actually see it is actually there. It's just not rendering on the page. So the issue I was taking was some of this text here. The AU core responders shall populate the element when the value is known and allowed to be shared, and should be capable of correctly populating the element using this data type. I was saying that the use of element in this context and the use of element in this context was a little bit ambiguous on whether we were talking about the element of being onset, the choice, or the element that is the data type, the concrete element, I guess.
I
The
read that as being the element like onset in both cases. And so the first one is saying you've got to populate element, and then later on it says you shall populate element using the appropriate data type. And I think, well, when I populate element, I have a choice of which data type, and this is telling me which data type to use. So to me, element in both cases applies to, in the example, onset.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just perhaps go back to the second part of the issue, which was about this second part of the sentence, which is typically this is means that an application should demonstrate during some conformance testing process that there are some conditions under which it populates the element with a correct value of that data type. So what I was saying here is this is actually the usage notes. If we just scroll up a little bit further up the top here, where we've defined our obligations, that in fact there is no obligation of shall populate, so able to populate, but the able to populate note contains that text. This is where typically this comes from. So I was basically saying, well, we're actually using the we're using the populate obligation, but we're using the notes from the able to populate in that second part. So through the triage process, the resolution that's recommended is not persuasive, but with modification. The justification for the not persuasive is that we've attempted to use plain language, and I think you've kind of said the same thing, Richard, that you agree with the fact that that plain language does actually describe the intent of what was trying to be described. But with a modification, that will remove the allowed to be shared, as this is true of all elements. And again, this goes back to the some of the notes, etc., around the definitions of obligations, that the allowed to be shared part is actually part of the populate and not part of the populate if known. So basically this is the proposed change or modification, with the rest of it being non-persuasive. Brett.
I'm happy with this resolution. Yeah, and I was just going to weigh in and agree with Richard. I think the element bit, elements are actually the choice of data type. So whilst you can put obligations on a particular data type, I think the language is fine. And if this is the way it's going to go, I'm happy with that.
All right. Thanks, Brett. Are there any other comments or questions around this particular JIRA issue or the proposed resolution? All right, I'm not hearing anyone. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'm happy to move.
Okay. So would anyone like to second?
I'll second again, Tushy.
Thanks, Tushy. I'm going to move to the poll. Any comments or questions while I move to that poll? Okay, let's just launch that now. Okay, you should see in front of you the poll for the current motion, which is to just remove the words "and allowed to be shared," because that's true of everything. And so we have a consistency point here. Okay, we've only got 80% voted, so just waiting for a couple more. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll. I'll share the results. And with the vote in the chat, we have 15 affirmative, 0 negative, 7 abstain. The motion carries. All right, thanks, Heath. So we would have one more, but with only 7 minutes to go, we can try. We can give a couple of minutes to it and see if we can do that. Let me share my screen and just bring up the topic that we would be voting on today. I'll just get down to it. Screen. Okay, it's this last one. Who on the line is going to be speaking to that one? Is that me? Is that someone else? There are a couple of people who couldn't make it today, and I'm wondering if it's... All right, I'm going to give it a go. If nothing else, we'll set this up for the next call. We have another editorial issue, and this is around AUCDI elements. So there's a section in AU Core, which I'll just go to now. And that section maps AUCDI elements into FHIR structures. Not all of those are must support elements due to the nature of this. There's an overlap in what AUCDI and AU Core does. But regardless, what we have is where we have an agreed mapping in where a particular valued conceptual clinical concept should be represented in a FHIR instance. We have a FHIR path mapping on how that works. Sometimes that's directly to one specific thing. Sometimes that's, if you look at this, that's observation.effective date time. That's one of those instances where there's multiple data types and the mapping has said, well, this particular AUCDI element goes into this particular date time choice in the observation.effective element. Sometimes we actually have more than one thing that is mapped. There's a concept of reason for encounter, and due to the way FHIR works, there are both the codable concept options. There's also the reference options where that goes out. We've got quite a few AUCDI elements that are mapped that way. Almost all the reasons are. And then also when it comes to meds, because there's such a choice of medication content where you can either map to something within the particular medication statement in line, or you can actually have a reference out to the medication resource within that med statement. So we've got kind of multiple sort of mappings shown by that particular thing could go in one of the following elements. It really depends on how the clinical information system data is being mapped as to how they choose to implement that. So that's what's in our table at the moment. There is an issue raised which is asking us to clarify support for data types for AUCDI data elements which support multiple data types. That's a bit different to what I was showing, which was where the FHIR has multiple data types. In this case, the question is, how do you map things where an AUCDI data element has multiple data types? The example given isn't relevant to core. This example is, it's not actually mapped to the core use case, but it's still a relevant question all the same. What's been proposed is, because what the question was is not only how do you do this, but can you add additional content to the page to clarify how it happens? And the response is that this is non-persuasive. It's non-persuasive because we already do that. the fire path column shows where there are multiple potential mappings into fire. That's already done. It's done for the audience of fire implementers using a pipe delimiter with a fire path dot notation. For this particular one around AU Core, there's only one element that's relevant. So there's a sequence element in the vaccination data group that has both, I think, a string and an integer for that. That actually gets mapped to the choice element because all the choices for that choice element are relevant. So that's where the mapping ends up going to in the fire path column. So there wouldn't be any changes to that. So essentially we're saying this is already taken into account. That's how the mapping column already works. And if there's any additional qualifications on how the element should be supported, that's what's already supplied in the comment column. Specifically for this question around multiple data types, we've not actually added any statements because we didn't think anything needed to be made for implementers to understand that there's an AUCDI element that has 2 data types that maps to a element in fire that has 2 choice data types that map as well. We thought that was pretty clear. Brett.
Yeah, I think we're not trying to do a technical concept-to-concept map of all the data types and content in AUCDI into the AU Core spec. So I think it's conceptually like we will look at what the element is defined as in AUCDI, and we will have a representation of that, which may be partial, which may be different. So I don't think we're attempting to necessarily represent that in the table. So I think it's quite all right what we're doing, and we've kind of said the concept you see here in AUCDI, this is how we are implementing it on our side, and if there's gaps there, you need to, I mean, people will need to look at that concept and say, you know, this representation only does part of it or does it in different ways. Yeah, I think that's about it really. So I think we shouldn't really get too concerned.
Well, I think the mapping already does it, as you've said. There's I
think if you wanted to go to a more formal mapping, I'd say use a formal tool to do the mapping, do a data mapping exercise. But then again, that's more of a traceability question from AUCDI into AU Core. And I don't think we want to operate at that level necessarily.
Okay.
You need more than a table, because they'd be like transforming ideas from one form to another. Yeah.
And we also have Heath.
I think the example that was provided, which as you've indicated is not relevant to AU Core at this stage, that one's potentially going to be tricky. But in the context of AU Core, I think as you've described, there's ways that we can do that if there is a situation that's relevant, and we can add commentary in the column alongside where needed. So I agree with this resolution, and I would like to move that we accept it.
Okay, so we have
I'll second.
Okay, we have a mover and we have a seconder from Heath and Brett. Are there any other comments or questions on this particular issue? All right, I'm hearing none, so I'm going to go to the vote if I can find buttons. Okay, the poll should be in front of you. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. Okay, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll. I will share the results. So we have 16 affirmative, 16 affirmative taking into account the chat, 0 negative, 4 abstain. The motion carries. Thank you, everyone. that is the end of the voting for today. Our next meeting is going to be all about ballot reconciliation again. We will notify via email what that's going to be. And daylight savings is coming up, so we need to vote on when we're going to meet, at what times, whether we retain whether or not we move to daylight savings times or not. There'll be a Zulip poll, and we'll notify that via email. Okay, coming to the end, apologies, we've gone over by a couple of minutes. Any other statements or anything people want to say before I bring the meeting to a close? All right, thanks everybody. We got through everything we needed to do today. That was fantastic.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.